Welcome to this introduction to pedagogy and learning design, which has been produced as part of the EOSC Synergy Project's online Train the Trainer programme. This talk will outline the basics of pedagogy and training design, and then introduce you to a couple of practical exercises. It's important to note that this session is a taster. There's a lot of information around pedagogy and design out there, but we focus on a few key points to get you started. In this session, we want you to help you create the best training you can, and we understand you might not have a lot of time and resources. So we want you to get the fundamentals right, so whatever you produce has good foundations. We're starting from the assumption that training is the right solution to the problem you're trying to address. It's useful to ask yourself this question, as within organisations in particular, other approaches might be better. For example, improving documentation and guides, or streamlining procedures. The action mapping approach referenced on the slide can help you think this through. We'll continue now assuming that training is the right solution to your problem. So how do we make sure that training meets the needs of your learners and your own aims? Perhaps you could pause the video and take a few moments to think about the training you've been to. What makes it good or bad? Usually it's things like not being appropriate for the audience, too much information being given, and not enough engagement with learners. So now you've thought a little about what makes good or bad training. How do you make sure that you design good training? The starting point is an understanding of pedagogy, or the study of teaching. It's worth noting that we're talking about training today, not teaching. For some people, there's a huge difference. Teaching is often seen to focus on abstract knowledge, theory and thinking, whereas training is focused on practical skills. I've always found it hard to separate the two. But no matter your view, an understanding of pedagogy is important for both teaching and training. There's also debate about the word pedagogy itself. Its Greek origin means leading children, and there's been a reaction to this, saying that the approaches used in pedagogy aren't always appropriate for adults. So you may hear the term andragogy, or the Greek for leading man. Generally, the difference is that adults must be able to see the relevance of learning and relate it to their own experiences. They tend to be more self-directed and self-motivated. But we're talking about pedagogy in general, and there are many, many theories and methods. Again, we just want to give you an introduction, so we'll focus on one commonly used theory, which is Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy has three domains: cognitive, which is around knowledge; affective, talking about emotion; and psychomotor, which is physical skills. And these all work together. This slide shows the cognitive domain, so focusing on knowledge, and it is the most commonly used in training. The idea is that one level builds on the next, leading to higher order thinking. So you start at the bottom with basic repetition of facts, and then move up, understanding what that facts and information actually means, being able to apply that, to evaluate knowledge for yourself, and then creation of your own knowledge at the top. This doesn't mean, however, that the lower levels are less valuable. Much learning depends on having a sound knowledge base to build upon. So an example from the open science context could be around data management planning. So you start off with what a data management plan is, so simply remembering and a bit of understanding what that is, why it's important, moving to understanding and application. Then moving on to being able to analyze your own data and decide what should and shouldn't be included in your data management plan. And finally, creating your own plan for yourself. The taxonomy is useful when it comes to learning and training design, as activities can be associated with the verbs, which are mapped to different levels. So usually you're trying to encourage learners to move up the taxonomy to become more independent in their understanding, application, use of knowledge. So when you've thought about what you want your learners to achieve, how do you support your learners through these levels? The idea is that you have a goal for your learners, and you'll come back to that shortly. You want them to get somewhere. Your scaffold is the frame for getting them there. So at the start, they might need some more support, but by the end, hopefully they've learned how to do things themselves. Your role as a trainer changes throughout this process. The level of support, and you assess and give feedback throughout the whole process. So that's a useful idea to think about when you come to designing your training. It's useful to think about why you're doing training. There are lots of different reasons why you might do it. Usually it's because there's a new tool, process, or service that you need or want people to know about. But you'll find there are also many other benefits to training. And the key point here is that you need to be aware of these reasons at the start in order that you build in appropriate approaches to address them. So the reasons might be that you want to change attitudes. Training is often seen about learning technical or practical skills, but usually there's a motivational element as well. You need to change attitudes by giving a clear idea of the benefits of the service or the technology that you're training in. It's especially true when it comes to promoting open science. Open science practices are often about changing culture and behaviour, so simply addressing skills isn't enough. As a service training deliverer, you might want to gather feedback on services, and training can be really useful to find out how learners or users use your services and see the issues that they struggle with, and you can use those to develop improvements. You might want to use the training courses as a start of a community, whether it's a user community for your own service or another type of community. So to enable peer support within your community and to help you understand the needs of your learners more. And finally, quite an important one, training can help you gather evidence of use. Most projects and services need to provide evidence and success, and training is one way to show that you've made an effort to raise awareness and encourage use of your service, and also get that feedback that we mentioned earlier. So as I said, there's many reasons why you might be doing training, and it's useful to factor these in your design process. So why do you need to think about design? We've talked about pedagogy, which we'll come back to later, but in terms of why think about design, creating training can be time consuming. So you really want to make the most of the resources that you have. So you want to make your course most effective, make sure you're choosing the most suitable methods and tools to make best use of your resources. There are also other factors to consider, such as making your materials easy to reuse, meeting legal requirements, and as you mentioned, designing in measures to evaluate the success of your training. So it's always good to think about these things right at the start. So how do we go about thinking about good design? Again, there are many models available, and we'll use a very common training framework called ADDIE, which involves analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. You often see the evaluation as part of the outer circle, but I prefer this model where evaluation is at the core, because it really is an integral part of the whole process. So with this model, it really is a step-by-step approach. So you work through the steps, and you can use different approaches within each of the steps. So again, we'll be giving you some suggestions about how you can carry out the analysis and design phases, which are the main ones that we'll be focusing on today. Just a word of warning though, it is tempting to jump straight into the development stage. So you have a new learning tool that you want to try out, and you just want to get going. But sometimes it is better to start at the analysis and design phase, because it will save you time in the long run. So please don't skip the analysis and design phases. Make sure you start with analysis and not start right at the development. Other points to bear in mind is that the process is iterative, so you don't necessarily go around once, you might be going around a few times, and that's why evaluation is the core. So you might develop your materials, run a pilot training course, get feedback, adapt, and then when you come to running it for the first time for real, then you've made your changes. And also it isn't always necessarily linear. Sometimes you might find that you do skip around the stages. So don't feel that you have to get your analysis and your design right first time. It is a process that you develop as you go through, and evaluation is at the core of that process. So to say a little bit more about evaluation, there are different ways and different levels of evaluation. And of course, it's linked quite closely to assessment. So we'll come back to that. This model here is a commonly used model of evaluation. It's Kirkpatrick's, and it shows again how there are different levels of evaluation, from evaluation at the bottom level, which is reaction, and that's the most commonly used type of evaluation. So that's why it's the larger block at the bottom. It's how does somebody feel after they've finished the training? Do they feel like they've learned something, that they've benefited from it? But of course, it doesn't actually really measure whether they have learned or not. So the next level up is that learning. Can you measure whether somebody has learned what you've been trying to teach them in the training? Following that, behavior. How does the training actually impact their behavior? And of course, this will happen outside of the training once the trainee has gone back to their usual working environment. And then finally, results. Has any results actually been achieved from this change of behavior? And I think the key point is that you should try and design in opportunities for assessment and evaluation right at the start of your training. Don't miss that opportunity to build in methods. So with learning and reaction, you can build that in throughout the course, sort of have points where you check knowledge, check whether the methods that you're using are appropriate. I think the harder methods are the behavior and results, because that tends to happen after the training course. But again, if you have access to your trainees within your institution, it may be that you could follow up with activities after the training to see the impact that your trainings actually had. So 2 points to remember about the analysis and design process. Basically, you're looking to make sure that the design that you create maps the outcomes that you want. So we'll come back to this again in a moment, but you've got a goal that you want your learners, your trainees to achieve, and you need to make sure that your activities reach that goal. But also they do need to be engaging and appropriate for your learners. You do need to make sure that they're at the focus of your training design. And one thing to mention, particularly in the time of post-COVID or during COVID, is that we're all doing more and more teaching online. Simply moving online won't fix poor training design. Using technology does not fix a poor design. So if your activities and outcomes are mismatched in your face-to-face design and you replicate that online, then nothing will change. So you do need to make sure that you focus on the right type of activity and replicate that in an online environment with the right tools and a little bit of creativity. We'll come back to learning activities shortly. So we're starting through the process, moving on to the practical aspects of training development. We've developed an analysis form which you can use to structure your planning. It covers things like goals, content, audience, as well as some quite practical things such as mapping out, who will actually create the resources, when does this need to happen, how will you attract attendees to the course. So there's quite a comprehensive form available for you to use. But for the exercise today, we have a shortened version, which we'll introduce you to later. Key at this point, we'll just go through a few of the real key things that you need to think of right at the start. And we'll start with goals, objectives, and outcomes. It's useful to know the difference, although again, there's a lot of discussion about meaning. So it's useful for this session just to have a common understanding of what we mean. A goal tends to be the big picture, sort of what you're trying to achieve at quite a high level. They're quite broad. And in this example here, we've got improved data management at your university. The objectives tend to be focused on what you as a trainer will do. So what is it you want to do to try and achieve this goal? In this case, we've decided we're going to run a series of training courses. So again, it's very much focused on what the trainer will do. However, the final level there are the outcomes. So what is it that the learners will actually be able to do once they've attended your training? So there's some quite specific outcomes there. So list the features of a data management plan, explain why data management is important, etc. So we're going from some quite broad goals down to some very specific outcomes. So it's useful to frame your thinking in this way, particularly as a mistake that's commonly made is that trainers will design training around what they want to tell trainees or what they want trainees to know, and not make that shift towards outcomes, thinking about, well, what will the trainees be able to do once they've left this training. Thinking about your audience is equally important. Try to think about your audience and their experience as much as you can, whether it's their role, background and context, what knowledge and skills and experience they bring, the motivation that they have, and in particular, any barriers or fears that they may have, so you can help address these in your training design. Sometimes you don't always know who the trainees are if you're putting an open advert out for your training, but you can create something called a persona, which is kind of like a model trainee, which helps describe your intended audience. When it comes to design, once you've defined your goals and audience and your learning outcomes, you can start on that design. And again, there are many different methods, and we've chosen one called the ABC Learning Design Method, which has been developed at University College London. The reason we've chosen that one is that it's well established, it's quick and simple, and it can be done in different ways. So you can do it in a face-to-face environment, or you can do it online in terms of the design. So essentially what you do with the learning design approach is map the learner's journey through your training and identify appropriate activities. So you think about, you want to get across a particular piece of content or a particular skill. How will you actually do that? And underpinning this particular method are 6 learning types. These learning types are outlined here. So we've got acquisition, collaboration, discussion, investigation, practice, and production. And you might notice that some of them sound quite familiar, and it does relate quite strongly back down to Bloom's taxonomy. So acquiring knowledge, practicing, producing, etc. And there are also elements of andragogy there, so learning through discussion and collaboration. But the idea with this is that you think about your learner's journey through your content, and think about which activities will get them to the outcome that you want, choosing a range of activities for a variety, but also, as I say, to reach different learning outcomes. So you might decide that you want collaboration to be used for a particular task, and then you can think about the specific activities a little bit later. That's sort of the next step. And this method, as I say, you can do it in a variety of different ways. This was an example that I did just on a flip chart, and this would be ideal for using in a group context. So using the whiteboard and stickers, etc. So you can see that I've got different pathways, different topics with different learner journeys through each of these pathways. And I've decided which type of activity I want to use, and then specifically saying the actual activity that I'll use. The yellow stars are where you can map on assessment and evaluation. So I've got some at the end, but also making sure that I've got formative assessment as we go through, as well as the summative assessment right at the end. So after this session, you might want to do this full method. It's particularly good, as I say, if you're working in groups with colleagues to co-developing training. But today we're just going to introduce you to a shorter method, just to give you a flavour of what this method entails. So in terms of designing your training, what we'd like you to do next is think about, why you're doing the training. We want you to actually have an understanding of the design process and to have a practice of doing it. We've put together 2 worksheets with practical questions from the initial training analysis, and then a short exercise using the ABC Learning Design model. You can do this in any way you wish, whether you want to do this on your own or with colleagues, and we usually think it takes around 40 to 60 minutes to complete. So the first part would be to start with your initial training analysis. As I say, we've created a cut down version for this exercise, but the full versions for when you do it for real are available as well. And just work through this worksheet, thinking about your goals, your title, a rough idea of content, the benefits and outcomes to your learners, and then move on to the design process. And that's where you think about your learner's journey. So you have different types of content or different sections that you want to design. What learning activities are you going to use to meet that, and how long might they be, and where might you do assessment? And just remember, none of this is set in stone. So it's really just at this stage is an exercise. It's great to get feedback from colleagues, I think, or potential users, potential trainees when you're doing design and at every stage. So we hope you found this exercise useful, and there'll be further information on the website accompanying this module. And you can also go to the EOSC Synergy website for further information on all of our materials. Thank you.